He was born somewhere on the Onan River in central Mongolia, probably around 1162, into a noble clan that had just lost everything. His name at birth was Temujin, given in honor of a Tatar chieftain his father had captured. By the time he was 9 years old, that father was dead, poisoned by Tatar enemies at a feast. The clan that had allied with his family promptly abandoned the widow and her children, taking the livestock and leaving them to survive on roots, wild onions, fish, and small rodents, food that any self-respecting Mongol herder would consider a mark of utter destitution. The steppe of the 12th century was not a romantic landscape. It was a continuous, low-level war of clan against clan, tribe against tribe, each group raiding the others for horses, cattle, and women, with no overarching law and no neutral ground. A fatherless boy from a dispossessed family had approximately no future in this world. Temujin was captured by the Takiak clan and imprisoned in a wooden collar, a device that prevented him from sleeping, eating, or moving independently, a symbol of absolute subjugation. He escaped by persuading a guard's family to help him, hiding in a river with only his face above water while searchers passed overhead. He was a teenager. It was the first of many times that his survival would depend not on physical strength alone, but on his ability to read people, find allies in unlikely places, and turn a moment of complete vulnerability into an advantage. He would do this again and again for the next 30 years, until there was no one left to oppose him. The friendship that became a war. As Temujin began slowly building a following in the early 1180s, two relationships defined his path. The first was with Toglo, the powerful Khan of the Kharite tribe and a sworn brother of his dead father, a political patron who gave Temujin the legitimacy and military backing he needed to operate in the brutal hierarchy of steppe politics. The second was with Jamuka, his closest childhood friend, with whom he had twice sworn the oath of Anda, blood brotherhood. They had grown up together, exchanged gifts, made pledges of loyalty that the steppe took seriously as binding as any treaty. For a time they rode together, commanded together, won together. The break, when it came, was ideological as much as personal. Jamuka believed power belonged to the aristocracy of birth, the great clan leaders who had always ruled the steppe. Temujin believed power belonged to whoever was most capable, regardless of origin. He gathered around him the people of Longwool, outcasts, younger sons, impoverished herders, men who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. His commanders were chosen for courage and loyalty, not bloodline. The civil war between them stretched across decades. Temujin suffered serious defeats, including at the Battle of Dalan Bal's hut, where Jamuka outmaneuvered him badly enough to boil his captured officers alive in 70 cauldrons. He rebuilt. He allied. He waited. And when Jamuka was finally delivered to him by followers who had turned against their own leader, Temujin refused to execute them for the betrayal, not out of mercy, but out of principle. Men who betrayed their sworn lord were useless to him regardless of what side they had been on. He had Jamuka executed, but gave him the death of a noble, without blood, strangled, so his spirit would pass intact into whatever came after. The Kurultai of 1206, a nation is named. In the spring of 1206, at the headwaters of the Onan River, the same river where Temujin had been born, the great assembly of Mongol nobility convened. Every tribe that had once warred against every other was represented. The white banner of 9 yak tails was raised. And Temujin was proclaimed supreme ruler of all the united peoples of the steppe with the title Genghis Khan, most likely meaning universal ruler, or Oceanic Khan, a title with no precedent in Mongol history because there had been no precedent for what he had done. At this moment, the Mongol nation was created. Not just unified, created. The dozens of tribes that had spent centuries killing each other ceased to exist under their old names. They became Kamag Mongol, all Mongols. Bound by a single law, a single loyalty, and a single lord. It was one of the most consequential acts of political invention in human history, accomplished in a tent on a riverbank in the middle of nowhere. The Great Yasa, law as a weapon. Genghis Khan understood something that most conquerors do not: territory you cannot administer, you cannot keep. The Great Yasa, his code of law, was the instrument by which he transformed a collection of nomadic warriors into a functioning state. Its most radical feature was the destruction of tribal identity within the military. The entire army and civilian population were reorganized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, the 2 mun. Within each unit, men from different tribes were deliberately mixed together. Transfer between units was forbidden on pain of death. The result was that a soldier's primary loyalty was no longer to his clan but to his unit. To the 9 men beside him, the 90 in his company, the 900 in his battalion. Blood ties were replaced by the bond of shared survival. The punishments encoded in the Yasa were severe. Desertion in battle brought death, not just for the deserter, but for his entire unit of 10, on the principle that if one man ran, the 9 beside him had failed. Lying under oath, theft of livestock, adultery, concealing a runaway slave, all capital offenses. The sacred waters could not be polluted. Bathing in running streams during summer thunderstorms was forbidden, as it was believed to provoke the sky spirits. But the Yasa also encoded obligations that cut the other way. Mutual aid was mandatory. Hospitality to travelers was required. A man's word, once given, was inviolable. The result was something that contemporary travelers found almost impossible to believe, that a single traveler, or, as the saying went, a virgin carrying a golden bowl on her head, could cross the entire empire without fear of robbery or assault. The infrastructure of trust, enforced by lethal consequences for violation, made the empire function. The Yam, speed as a state. The logistical achievement that made the empire governable across its enormous distances was the Ortu, the relay postal system, known in Russian-influenced history as the Yam. At intervals of roughly 1 day's ride across the entire empire, stations were established with fresh horses, food, shelter, and personnel. Riders carrying the imperial peza, a metal tablet that served as both passport and absolute authority, could cover hundreds of kilometers in a single day by changing horses at each station without stopping. This was not merely a postal service. It was a nervous system. Military orders traveled from the Khan's court to the edges of the empire in days rather than weeks. Intelligence from distant campaigns reached headquarters fast enough to be acted upon. Tax records, diplomatic correspondence, and administrative reports moved through the network continuously. The Yam gave a single man sitting in a tent in Mongolia effective control over territory stretching from Korea to Persia. Something no previous empire had achieved because no previous empire had solved the communication problem at this scale. Marco Polo, traveling through the empire decades after Genghis Khan's death, counted over 10,000 relay stations and described the system with unconcealed amazement. It was, he wrote, something the greatest kings of Europe could not match. The army that was never as large as it seemed. The Mongol armies that terrified Eurasia were not vast in number. The total population of Mongolia at the time of Genghis Khan's rise was probably no more than 1 million people. His army at its peak, the force that simultaneously threatened China, Central Asia, and the Caucasus, numbered perhaps 130,000 to 150,000 men. Many of the armies he defeated were larger. What made the Mongol military so effective was a combination of mobility, discipline, and tactical intelligence that had no equivalent in the medieval world. Every warrior rode with 3 to 5 horses on campaign, rotating mounts to maintain speed even on forced marches. Mongol horses, bred in the harsh steppe, could survive on forage dug from under snow, eliminating the enormous supply trains that slowed every other medieval army. A Mongol force could cover 100 kilometers in a day. European armies of the same period moved at roughly 30. The composite bow was the primary weapon. A recurved instrument of horn, sinew, and wood that could penetrate armor at ranges European longbowmen could not match. Each warrior carried multiple arrow types, armor-piercing, incendiary, and whistling signal arrows whose sound coordinated movement across the noise of battle. Silk undergarments were worn beneath the armor. Not for comfort, but because when an arrowhead punched through, the silk wound around it, allowing the point to be extracted cleanly by unwinding the fabric rather than cutting into the wound. Their signature tactic was the mangadai, the feigned retreat. A forward unit would engage the enemy, then break and run in apparent panic. As the opposing force pursued and broke formation in the excitement of chase, the retreating unit wheeled and the hidden main force closed from the flanks. The trap required exceptional discipline. The men pretending to flee had to resist the psychological pull of actually fleeing. It worked, repeatedly, because the discipline of the decimal system produced soldiers capable of controlled panic on command. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire, a trade caravan starts a catastrophe. In 1218, Genghis Khan had no plans to fight in the west. He sent a trade caravan of roughly 500 camels loaded with silk, jade, and gold into the territory of the Khwarezmian Empire, one of the wealthiest and most sophisticated Islamic states of the era, controlling the great cities of Central Asia. With the caravan went a diplomatic mission. The governor of the border city of Otra, a man named Inalchuk Qadir Khan, decided the merchants were spies, a suspicion that may not have been entirely wrong. And, with the blessing of the Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II, had them killed and the goods confiscated. Genghis Khan sent an embassy demanding the governor's extradition. Muhammad executed the lead ambassador and shaved the beards of the others, the most deliberate insult available in the diplomatic vocabulary of the era. What followed was not a punitive raid. It was annihilation. In 1219, 3 Mongol armies converged on the Khwarezmian Empire simultaneously from different directions. Muhammad, who did not trust his own generals enough to give any of them supreme command, dispersed his enormous army across the garrisoned cities, exactly what Genghis Khan needed him to do. Bokhara fell. Samarkand fell. Urgench was taken after a prolonged siege and a significant portion of its population was drowned when the Mongols diverted the Amu Darya River through the city. Merv, Nishapur, Herat. The great centers of Islamic scholarship and architecture, cities that had taken centuries to build, were reduced to rubble in weeks. Muhammad fled westward and died of pleurisy on a deserted island in the Caspian Sea, alone, having lost his empire because he killed the wrong merchants. Subutai and Jebe, the reconnaissance that reached Russia. While pursuing Muhammad, Genghis Khan detached his 2 greatest generals, Subutai and Jebe. On a reconnaissance in force that became one of the most extraordinary military expeditions in history. With a corps of roughly 30,000 men, they swept through Persia, crossed the Caucasus Mountains in winter, a feat considered nearly impossible, defeated the Alan and Cuman peoples of the steppe, and finally encountered a coalition of Russian princes and Kuman Khan. On May 31, 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, the combined Russo-Cuman force was destroyed. The Russian princes argued over precedence rather than coordinating their defense. Their armies engaged piecemeal and were cut apart in detail. The Mongols celebrated by laying wooden boards over the captured princes and eating and drinking on top of them until the men below suffocated. Subutai and Jebe then turned east and rejoined the main army, having been gone for 3 years and having covered approximately 6,000 kilometers. The battle at the Kalka was a reconnaissance. The next visit, led by Genghis Khan's grandson Batu, would be the real thing. Pax Mongolica, the peace that followed the fire. The destruction was real. Population estimates for the regions affected by Mongol conquest in the 13th century suggest deaths numbering in the tens of millions. Some historians place the figure as high as 40 million, though the methodology behind such estimates is genuinely uncertain. The irrigation systems of Central Asia, built over centuries to sustain cities in an arid climate, were destroyed in ways that took generations to repair. Some cities were never rebuilt. And yet, in the decades after the conquest, the Mongol Empire imposed something that its victims would not have predicted, a period of relative peace and open exchange across an enormous swath of Eurasia. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, was a direct consequence of the same qualities that had made the conquest so devastating: the efficiency of the administrative system, the ruthlessness toward anyone who disrupted order within the empire, and the Mongols' genuine understanding that taxable merchants were more valuable alive than dead. The Silk Road, which had fragmented into competing territorial jurisdictions under dozens of independent rulers, was brought under unified control. Internal customs barriers were eliminated. Banditry along the routes was suppressed with the same lethal consistency applied to battlefield desertion. For roughly a century, a merchant could travel from the Mediterranean to China under a single legal framework, with a single set of documents, without crossing a hostile frontier. This was historically unprecedented. It would not be repeated until the modern era. Religious tolerance was encoded in the Yasa from the beginning. Not out of spiritual conviction, but out of the same pragmatism that drove everything else. Genghis Khan himself followed Tengrism, the traditional Mongol worship of the eternal blue sky. He found the passionate exclusivity of monotheistic religions puzzling and somewhat unnecessary. At his court, Buddhist monks, Nestorian Christians, Muslim scholars, Taoist priests, and shamans coexisted, debated, and competed for imperial favor. All were exempt from taxation. Genghis Khan's position was essentially that he was uncertain which prayers were most effective, and preferred to hedge across all available options. The death and the grave that cannot be found. Genghis Khan died in the summer of 1227, during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom of Xia, the same people who had refused military support at a critical moment years earlier, a slight he had never forgotten. The cause of death is genuinely unknown. A fall from a horse the previous year had left him with internal injuries that never fully healed. Illness, possibly complicated by the harsh campaign conditions, finished what the fall had begun. One persistent legend involves a captured Tangut princess who inflicted a wound before being killed, romantic, dramatic, and almost certainly invented. Before he died, he gave final instructions. Xia was to be annihilated completely, its population destroyed, its records erased. His sons carried this out with the thoroughness he would have expected. The Tangut kingdom ceased to exist so comprehensively that its written language was not deciphered until the 20th century. His burial was conducted according to the most rigorous precautions against discovery. The funeral procession killed everyone it encountered on the road to the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun, ensuring no one could report the route. The grave was dug by slaves who were then killed by the soldiers guarding them, who were then killed by other soldiers. By some accounts, a river was diverted over the burial site, by others, 10,000 horses were driven across the grave until the ground was indistinguishable from the surrounding steppe. No monument was raised. No marker was left. The grave of the man who conquered more continuous territory than any ruler in history has not been found. Dozens of expeditions have searched. Satellite imaging has been applied to the likely region. Ground-penetrating radar has swept the hills near the Onan River. Nothing. He is there, somewhere, under the grass of the Mongolian steppe, as invisible in death as he was, briefly, when he was a boy hiding in a river with searchers passing above him. The world he left. Genghis Khan's direct descendants, the Chinggisids, ruled significant portions of Eurasia for centuries after his death. In China, his grandson Kublai founded the Yuan dynasty. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate. Across the Eurasian steppe and into Eastern Europe, the Golden Horde, the Ulus of Jochi, shaped the political development of Russia for 2.5 centuries, influencing its administrative structures, its relationship with central authority, and its sense of geographic identity in ways that historians still trace in the present day. The human cost of his campaigns was catastrophic and irreversible for the regions most affected. That is not in dispute. What is also not in dispute is that the world he created, the connected, legally ordered, commercially active Eurasian space of the 13th century, represented something genuinely new. The first time in history that a single political authority had linked the Pacific coast to the Mediterranean, creating the conditions for the exchange of goods, diseases, ideas, and people on a scale the world had not previously known. The Black Death reached Europe along the Mongol trade routes. So did gunpowder. So did paper money. So did the information that eventually made European exploration of Asia and the Americas imaginable. The Pax Mongolica was the incubator of the modern world. Built on the ruins of the medieval one, by a boy from the Onan River who once hid in the water to survive, and who spent the rest of his life making sure no one would ever make him hide again.